Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to try and decide what the greatest tune by the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra is. This is something I've debated many a time, and I'll tell you why. Because so often when I've told people about the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra and I say, well, this is the greatest band that there ever was, and they go, well, you know, what are they like? And then you want to play them a track. Which track would you play them to represent the might and the majesty of this incredible band, right? So I'm going to have a discussion. I haven't made a decision yet. I'm going to talk my way through it on this video. So the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra were formed in 1971 by the jazz rock guitarist John McLaughlin. Previous to that, he had worked in Tony Williams' Lifetime and with Miles Davis. Miles Davis in 1971 turned around to him after a gig and said, I think you need to go away and form your own band. At the time, John McLaughlin was following a guru called Sri Chinmoy, and he went to Sri Chinmoy and told him about this idea, and Sri Chinmoy turned around and said, I think you should call it the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. Which, when you've been given a name like that, you've got to form a band, haven't you? The MAHAVISHNU Orchestra came out in 1971 with their first album, which was called The Inner Mountain Flame, and completely changed not only jazz, not only rock, but also prog. This was a groundbreaking album. Nobody had ever heard anything like this before. It was faster, louder, more intense, more out there than any other band that had ever been, right? And they created a storm. They created something that had momentum. I think a lot of them thought that they were going to be making an album which just sort of came out within the jazz genre and sold a few thousand copies. But this album, despite being an instrumental album, which is very, very intense and really quite difficult to listen to, it got picked up because I think at the time there was a sort of zeitgeist out there amongst young people where they wanted their minds blown, and the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra became the band that you went to see to have your mind blown, right? John McLaughlin put together a band of incredible ability and talent. On drums he had Billy Cobham, right? Faster than anybody around at that time, more intense, you know, equal to him in terms of what he was doing on the drums. And the incredible Jan Hammer, incredible jazz pianist, but was interested in exploring electricity. He wanted to be able to use synthesis to change the way keyboard players played, specifically to be able to bend notes, sustain note, and create the sort of sounds that you would hear in the blues or Indian music. And those are the two influences that come into the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, along with rock and jazz and even little bits of sort of Americana country. But the two explosive things in there is the Indianness and the bluesiness, right? John McLaughlin, for all his jazz virtuosity, was rooted in the blues. This is the first music he really liked. I think Big Bill Broonzy was the guy that turned him onto the guitar. And the blues is always in McLaughlin's playing, but it's like an abstraction of the blues, right? So that is the sound of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. They like machine gun melodies, twisting unison lines that sound like bluesy and Indian at the same time. Incredibly difficult arrangements, group improvisation, circular improvisation where people would solo for like a couple of bars each and just circle it around. These are all the hallmarks of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, and of course the insane time signatures as well. And not just playing insane time signatures, but improvising with inside these time signatures. Those are the hallmarks of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. So the thing is, we need to ask ourselves is, what track sort of embodies all that? But when the first album came out, it's an absolute classic. Many people who follow this channel have messaged me saying they think that this was the greatest album. The first album was recorded very cheaply, over a couple of days. The engineers didn't know how to deal with a band of this volume, right? And so it's not lo-fi, but it has a certain punk intensity about that album, which sort of sets it apart from all the other albums. And a lot of people who like the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, that it's that aspect of it that makes them feel that this is the greatest album of all time. So it's an obvious choice to pick a track off that album as being their greatest track. I feel that the first album is 90% there, but it's lacking 3 elements. One is the production, right? Later on, they have incredible production, this rich, sumptuous sound. That's not quite there on the first album. The second thing is Billy Cobham's drum kit. He's playing a small jazz-sounding kit with a single bass drum. Later on, he would pioneer double bass drum playing, and that becomes an integral part of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra sound. And more than anything else, Jan Hammer is not playing a Moog. He's doing incredible stuff on electric piano and using effects to bend the notes, right? And his electric piano playing is incredible on this album, but we don't have that Moog sound. But apart from that, I'd say that the elements are 90% there. On that album, it's almost like every track is a classic, and there's 2 tracks that stand out for me. Firstly, right at the end of the album, there's a track called Awakening, and the sort of brutal, you know, speed metal aspects before speed metal even existed is pushed to the limit on Awakening, or Awaken. I can't remember what the title of the track is. Either Awakening or Awaken. Oh, my MAHAVISHNU knowledge. It's an incredible track. When I first heard the album, that was the track that blew me away. I never heard a band play like that. And because of the way it sounds like people are just playing in a room, you know this is happening for real, right? But that sort of dark, twisting intensity, the use of the blues and Indian sounds, I feel that the standout track on the first album would be Dance of Maya. Dance of Maya has a heaviness to it, which is almost a precursor to like metal and prog metal. It's an absolutely incredible track. It lurches along and it sounds like the blues, but it doesn't sound like the blues at the same time. The time signature, which I think is in 20. Is that right? It's in 20. It's divided up 6, 6, 6 and 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's the time signature. And that's a very innovative way of dividing up time. You know, I think this sort of stuff had already been done by Don Ellis. It had been done to a certain extent by Frank Zappa. But the MAHAVISHNU have a fluidity in the way they play time signatures, and it's really down to the way that Billy Cobham is breaking down the time. And he's breaking down the time almost like a tabla player. And that's what we hear on Dance of Maya. So the track off that album that I would go for would be Dance of Maya. They then come out in 1972 with Birds of Fire. Now we have the production values, we have Billy Cobham's kit properly recorded with 2 bass drums, and we have the Moog synth. Right, this is my favourite MAHAVISHNU Orchestra album, maybe. I'm such a MAHAVISHNU fan that I change, you know. There's definitely 3 albums that I cycle around. The first album and this album, and I'll come to the 3rd album when we get to it. On this album, we have that sort of Dance of Maya intensity, that sort of arpeggiating, twisting sound, which I really feel is a characteristic of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra on the opener Birds of Fire. And for me, it's more successful than Dance of Maya in doing that. On Celestial Terrestrial Commuters, they're playing flat out in 1916. It's insane. But when you flip the album onto side 2, it opens up with One Word. And One Word is just a tour de force of MAHAVISHNU-ness. It's incredible. You know, they're playing at such speed, and that's like almost like the version of Awaken off the first album. And so it's going to be one of those 3. All the other tracks are great, but it's going to be one of those 3. And for me, it would be a toss-up between Birds of Fire and One Word. When I was young and I discovered the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, I lived by Birds of Fire. It represented something to me that had nothing to do with music, a state of mind that I was in at 15 years old. A sort of spiritualness, but at the same time a torment, was all encapsulated in that track. Later on I would discover that sound in John Coltrane, especially the later John Coltrane. But for many years, if I wanted to sort of get across what the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra sounded like, I would go for One Word, right? So on that album, we've got One Word and Birds of Fire, okay? They then follow that up with a live album called Between Nothingness and Eternity. It's only got 3 tracks on. The first opening track is called Trilogy. It's got this insane double bass drum section, which is a precursor to things like Hot for Teacher and then the thrash metal bands. It's incredible. They're playing live, so we get to hear the live sound of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. And believe me, if you really want to truly understand this band, you have to hear them live and what they did live. So Trilogy is incredible. And then there's the second track on the album is called Sister Andrea, that has an incredible guitar cadenza from McLaughlin and is written by Jan Hammer. And Jan Hammer's composition gives it actually a funkier sound on that. You know, the first album hasn't got that much funk on, but Sister Andrea's got moments of very intense funkiness. But when you put it over onto side 2, we have the Sidelong Dream. And this does absolutely everything that the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra does. It's an unbelievable track. We've got the sort of Billy Cobham, John McLaughlin duet inside there. It's incredibly intense. It's probably their most intense moment because it goes on for so long. It also opens up with a very ethereal opening section. The MAHAVISHNU Orchestra could be very ethereal and minimal and beautiful at the same time. And so we hear that on there. So I think if I was going to pluck for a track off Between Nothingness and Eternity, I would go for Dream. Right, so at that point, the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra call it a day. Before they did the live album, they did go into the studio, and it was pretty much a failure. Incredible stuff was made, but it was a failure, and that stress of making that and arguments over composition credits and all that type of thing, and the fact that I think these incredible musicians were all superstars in their own right, but they're having to work under the name of John McLaughlin, and so all these stresses, along with touring to 250 gigs a year, the band at that point call it a day. And so we've had like basically just 2 years of this incredible band. It's an amazing thing that in those 2 years they changed music history. Right, so the Lost Trident sessions is basically studio versions of the tracks on Between Nothingness and Eternity. There's a couple of things that are original. They don't stand out as being the best of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. There's nothing on that album that I would put forward. If you're a MAHAVISHNU Orchestra fan, you don't go for that album first. It's a secondary listen, I think. It's incredible, and us MAHAVISHNU fans love it because it's more MAHAVISHNU, but I'm not going to consider anything off that album. In 1974, he reconvenes the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra with a new lineup. The surprising intensity of that debut, as they do not have that novelty, and this band has never been considered as being as great as the first band. It's really rooted around a new lineup, which is Narada Michael Walden on drums, Ralph Armstrong on bass, and the incredible John Luc Ponty on violin, that sort of comes in and takes over from Jan Hammer. It's incredible, you know, possibly one of the greatest jazz violinists that's ever lived. Gail Moran on keyboards and vocals, and she is got a beautiful voice, a beautiful touch on keyboards, but she's not a virtuoso. So there's the dynamics changed. They go into the studio with George Martin and then they make an album called Apocalypse with the London Symphony Orchestra. It's an incredible achievement. It's one of the greatest meldings, I'm going to use the word meldings, one of the greatest meldings, I don't know if that's a word, of an orchestra with a live band. It's an incredible album, but it sort of stands alone in the catalogue. It's not the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. McLaughlin really opens up. There's a lot of incredible soloing on there. I don't think I could put anything on this album forward as being their greatest moment. The compositions, which sort of run between you know, the orchestra and then the band over really long compositions, it's really hard to pick a track out and go, well, that represents the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. At the time, John McLaughlin said that he believed this to be the real MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. I don't think he meant it was better, that he was pursuing an orchestral sound. It was something he wanted to do on the Lost Trident sessions and it didn't come off. So here he's bringing in this orchestra. The band is augmented by a string quartet, there's trumpets, there's saxophones, it's an expanded lineup. This is an incredible album, but I don't think I would consider anything on that album as being one of their greatest tracks. The following year, well actually at the end of 1974, they go into the studio again and record Visions of the Emerald Beyond, which is my favourite album of all time, okay? Simple as that. Like I said, my three favourite albums would be In a Mountain Flame, Birds of Fire and Visions of the Emerald Beyond. Visions of the Emerald Beyond is actually a cut down version of what's on Apocalypse. It's just basically the band without the orchestra, but with the string quartets and the brass coming through. It has an incredible orchestral sound, right? All the tracks on here are mind-blowing. I can remember when I bought this album and I put the first track on, Eternity's Breath, I can remember staring at the speakers in disbelief and hearing these lines, unison lines that were changing character. They were twisting between sort of bluesy, jazzy lines and then into very Indian sounding lines. The production on this album is absolutely unbelievable. I was listening to an interview with Trevor Horn, the great 80s producer that did Frankie Goes to Hollywood and Yes Is 90125, and they said, you know, where did he get this sound from? And he said, well, there were some incredible albums in the 70s like Visions of the Emerald Beyond. You know, Ken Scott, it's an incredible, who was a producer, it's an incredible sound on that album, absolutely incredible. The drum sound Narada's got is just mind-blowing. If you check out my interview with Narada on this channel, he will go through how he got that drum sound. It's very interesting, and I'll let you explain it on there, because if you're a drummer, it's quite surprising. For me, Cosmic Strut is incredible. On My Way Home to Earth, it is incredible. Be Happy is incredible. But Lila's Dance is a very concise track that sort of does everything the Mahavishnu Orchestra does. It does the weird odd time signatures, it does the sort of arpeggiating darkness, but it also, it goes into the blues. It's very close to Dance of Maya in terms of its sound, but it's actually developed a little bit beyond Dance of Maya. The band has now, or McGofflin has now really perfected the sound. The production's incredible, and the guitar solo that McGofflin does on that is one of his greatest solos he ever did, in my opinion. It might be my favourite McGofflin solo. It's absolutely ballistically out of control. It's like beyond Hendrix, right? So Lila's Dance is the track I'm going to go for off Visions of the Emerald Beyond. Right, the last album, which I've got behind me, this one here, I will grab it. Inner Worlds. This is it's probably, I hate to use the word weakest. It's not in the same category as the rest of the album. This is a quite a strange album. It's a great album. I've always felt that McGofflin's input on this is less, right? The compositions that he's written are sort of like jams. The more fleshed out compositions are usually by the rest of the band. It's very close to being like almost like a Narada Michael Walden solo album in places. I was looking at a sort of blind test that was done in the 70s on Billy Cobham. I think they played him this album and he thought it was a Narada solo album. Might have got that wrong, but I think that's the case. And that's what it's like. There's some incredible stuff on it. Inner Worlds is incredible. Way of the Pilgrim is incredible. All in the Family is incredible. But there's one track that goes beyond, in terms of intensity, goes beyond anything that the Mahavishnu Orchestra ever made. And it's the second track on the album, if I could show you it there. Right, see that? The second track's called Miles Out. Miles Out is unbelievable. This is, if you want to hear where the Mahavishnu Orchestra was going, right, where the hell will they go on this track? This is like free jazz Mahavishnu Orchestra, using electronics, using noise. It's an incredible track. It divides people up. There's a lot of Mahavishnu Orchestra fans that absolutely hate this track. Me and I think Gary Husband both think it's mind-blowing. I mean, it's incredible. Right, so I'll just stick that back there so we've got in the background all nice next to my very rare book, Echoes from Then by Colin Harper. Great book, full of lots of detail on the Mahavishnu Orchestra. So, the tracks I've whittled it down to at the end of this video would be Dance of Maya, One Word, Dream, Lila's Dance, and Miles Out. There's a beautiful EP there if anyone wants to do it, and I might put those tracks in a playlist for you so you can have a listen to them, and that will be my sort of creme de la creme of the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra. What track do you think I'm going to go for? Well, I'm going to whittle it down to two: Dance of Maya or Lila's Dance. They both got the name Dance in the title. That's weird. I hadn't realised that. Yes. Oh, that's strange, that is. Oh, does that mean anything? No. So, I'm going to go for, as the greatest track by the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra, I'm going to go for the contentious choice, because that's what you come here for. I'm going for Lila's Dance. Unbelievable. And that violin solo with a delay, unbelievable. And I think the thing with that is everything about the MAHAVISHNU Orchestra is not only represented in that, but it has evolved to the peak. The production, the sound, the playing, the composition. It's a beautifully simple composition that does something in 5/4 and then goes through a blues section similar to Dance of Maya in 20, and then they put the two sections on top of each other and you see the interplay. It's 3-part progression. Absolutely beautiful, incredibly simple, incredibly complex. It's one of the greatest moments in jazz rock, in jazz, and in music altogether. So that is my choice. Lila's Dance wins out, right? And hopefully your nosiness has meant you stayed right to the end of the video to find out what my choice was. Or some of you might skip to the end, right? So those of you who are still here, thanks for watching. If you like this video, stick a like on it, please. If you want to see more stuff that I do, then press the subscription button and then ring the notification bell. And if you want to support me in what I'm doing, become a Patreon. And now we're having Patreon meetups on Zoom, and you will start seeing them on the channel, so you'll start to see what you're missing. And I've got some heavyweight jazz legends lined up for interviews in the future, and my patrons are going to be in those Zoom calls. They'll be able to sit there and ask these legends questions, right? I've got on Friday coming into my Patreon the incredible award-winning filmmaker Ben McAnin, and we're going to be talking about whether jazz actually has a future. You'll be able to watch that on Saturday, but if you want to be in the conversation and chat to Ben about it, become a patron right now. Right? I'm really trying to move my Patreon to something which is really a powerful place for not only musicians but music fans to come together and talk about this incredible music and get involved, because you're probably watching this channel because you love me talking about this stuff, and none of your friends talk about it, do they? So if you can do that, and then go and sign up for Patreon. Phew, right, got to the end of the video. I'm going to see you on the next video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye everybody.